You're listening to the Leading Healthy Creative Teams podcast with Matt Curtis. This is the podcast that helps you take your creative team from wherever you are today to healthy and effective.
This week, we're going to talk about 5 myths when it comes to effective leadership. These are things that you may be holding on to. In fact, if you are coming from a creative executor role, you are probably holding on to these 5 things. I know I was when I made that shift from executor to leader. These have the potential to sabotage your ministry and to sabotage your effectiveness. And really, most catastrophically, they have the potential to sabotage your longevity in the church. I really want to challenge you with them so that you can course correct early. And if you're maybe a little way down the road, then maybe gaining some perspective on this will help you turn around a little bit and move in a direction that's going to be healthier for you and for your team. Before we jump into that, I want to encourage you to write a review of the podcast. They're super helpful beyond just being practically helpful for those who are looking and trying to assess if the podcast is worth their time. They're so encouraging to me. I want to read you one of the reviews that we've gotten. I love it. It was such an encouragement to get this. I don't know how to pronounce the name. It's B. Jordan, maybe. That's my guess. As a creative in ministry, I see such a gap in the market for resources, podcasts, etc., for creatives in the church, which is so frustrating. It's so encouraging to hear that because that's what I felt too. In fact, that's actually the driving force behind what I'm trying to create here with Lunchtime Heroes. I want this space in the church to thrive. And I want the creatives below the creative leader to thrive. And the only way that can happen is when those who are leading the creative initiatives in the church are in a healthy space themselves. Sometimes it's tools, sometimes it's education, sometimes it's resources. But that's what I'm trying to put out there. So thank you so much for this review. The other thing I love at the end of the review, he talks about his own context, how he's serving as a graphic design coordinator in his church, and he's leading a team of people. He would love to see more graphic design focused episodes. It's really helpful for me as I hear where those of you who are listening are coming from so that I can make sure that I'm elevating some of the content toward those groups and those needs. Write a review. Very thankful for those of you who are leaning in and enjoying the podcast. The other thing that I'll do here just quickly, I just want to remind you of all of the different ways that you can connect and get access to resources. If you're just listening to the audio form of the podcast, there are other ways that you can plug in. I'm also posting a YouTube version or a video version of the podcast episode, and then I'm trimming up some of the highlights throughout the week to post and share. So join me on YouTube. The other place that I would really encourage you to plug in is on my email newsletter list. It's Creative Bites. That's the name of the newsletter. Every month to 2 weeks, I'm sending out resources and tools that are helpful for you as a church leader who's trying to navigate this gap between creative ministry and leadership. Those tools go out regularly, drop them right in your inbox. And when you sign up, you'll actually be sent to the page that takes you to all of the past resources that I've ever released. Hopefully those things are helpful. Would love to hear back from you to hear how this can be more helpful for the needs that you have serving in the trenches of ministry today. Now that the housekeeping is out of the way, let's jump in. The first myth I want to tackle here is this: leaders need to be the hero. This is a really dangerous mindset that I believe is born in the execution layer of the organization. When I was executing, I had to make sure that the misses from other people were not actually misses anymore. And so if this was incorrect information, I would have to identify it, and I would hopefully be able to course correct it in time for us to publish our material. If we saw a major issue happening in the weekend service or ahead of the weekend service, we would do everything that we possibly could to course correct it so that it didn't show up. Our jobs were essentially, as a small band of people, to make everything work right. That's what we do as executors. And as creative executors, everything that the church operates with runs through us. So we have the opportunity to catch problems that very few other people do. We could see that 2 events were booked at the same time. We could see that an event was not the same in one place as it was in another. The calendars didn't align. That's a problem. So we had visibility on a lot of different things that made us start to feel like we were heroes, like we were constantly putting on our capes and saving the day. We are executing within the context of a local church. So the leader of that organization, of that local church, they're defining the specific methodologies in terms of how we accomplish the mission of the church laid out for us in God's word. We're not the ones driving the mission of the church. Yeah, we may be catching problems. Yeah, we may be fixing things that were broken and we're fixing them before they become seen. Fantastic. Keep doing it. But it doesn't mean that we're the hero of the organization. It means we're doing our job. That's why we're hired. We're hired there to help solve those types of problems. The reason I expand on this a little bit is because as soon as you move into a leadership role, you have to flip that switch off because you can't solve the same types of problems that you used to solve. When you become a leader, the problems begin to shift into a more relational type of problem. So this is angst between departments or teams. This is problems with the congregation not being able to access information correctly. This is somebody on your team causing division within the organization. When you step into a leadership role, those are the problems that are now yours to navigate. It means that you need to lean into those problems in a different way because they're not transactional. They're not execution-oriented problems. If we approach our jobs as the heroes to solve these major issues, we're going to be arrogant, we're going to be condescending, and we're not going to be helpful to the ministry teams that we actually serve. They don't serve us, we serve them. And so you need to shift your mindset out of being a hero in the organization. This is true if you're an executor too. It's an unhealthy mindset to assume that you're the hero because you're going to lead yourself to burnout and arrogance, and really you're going to cause heart problems within the organization. There's going to be toxicity in your relationships. You're going to be judgmental. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard creatives say, not sarcastically, but genuine with full ownership, this place would not survive if it weren't for my team, if it weren't for me, if it weren't for the work that I'm doing. The grand irony is those people left the team and we kept on humming because the mission of the church isn't about them. It's not about you. The second leadership myth that I want to talk about is very common for young leaders, somebody who's just stepped out of execution and is starting to get their feet wet in leadership. It's maybe their first role. They haven't been doing it a long time. The myth is that good leaders always make good decisions. I want to share this stat with you because Forbes shared it and I thought it was very, very applicable to this idea of effective leaders are usually making the right decision. What percentage of hires are successful? This is always that awkward thing for young leaders. Like, I don't know how to hire somebody. I don't know how to interview them. What do I look for? What don't I look for? There are actually a lot of interview tips a couple episodes ago, so feel free to look back into the archives there. You'll actually find my interview questions as well, the things I love to ask and why I ask those questions. But what do you think? What do you think the percentage is for new hires? How many of them are a good fit? Here's the answer. Statistics show that only 50% of the time a process is considered a success, and that the recruiter feels that they hired a great fit for the employee or for the organization. That means half of the time, the hiring manager or the employee has some remorse. 50%, that's a really low average. The highest priority is making the best decision possible, and in a lot of cases, it's getting the reps in to be able to either change that number, so now we're up to 70% instead of 50%, or know that you're not great at that, and then be quick to respond to it. Bad leaders are the ones that don't do anything. If you have somebody on your team, whether it be a staff member or a volunteer, and they're not cutting it, start building a plan to respond to the problem. Don't just be defeated in the fact that this person isn't the best addition to the team right now. Figure out a development plan. I'm going to point to healthychurchcreatives.com. Go through the quiz. It's going to help you assess your creative team, and it's going to give you visibility on the areas where your team needs to improve. There's a good chance that your team needs to improve in the same areas that an individual who's underperforming needs to improve, because underperformance tends to bring the whole team down. Identify the areas where someone's struggling and invest in those. That's what good leadership looks like. It's less about always making the perfect hire or always making the perfect decision. It's making a decision and then figuring out how do we support the consequences of that decision as best as possible. The third myth that young leaders believe is that good leaders don't have blind spots. This is another one of those really powerful myths in terms of its ability to submarine your leadership. If you believe that good leaders don't have blind spots, then you're going to pretend that you don't have blind spots because that's what you believe. You're going to try to posture yourself as a good leader. And you are going to realize, in many cases catastrophically, that you do in fact have blind spots. This is one that I see young leaders make all the time. They assume that their promotion means that they know everything that they need to know about what they're doing. That's not why you were promoted. You were promoted because you have the potential to grow into this role. Not because you're already done, not because you've already arrived. Because if your organization values development, once you get to the point where they say he's arrived or she's arrived, they're going to be looking for the next opportunity. So don't assume that you don't have blind spots. In fact, the best leaders are the ones who are the quickest to recognize that they have blind spots. And then they bring people into their relational world to help them navigate the blind spots. So I have a handful of people in my life that I can reach out to. Actually, one of them I sent a text just the other day. I said, hey, I'm thinking about retooling some of the things in terms of the way that I approach my business. Can I pick your brain? Can you give me some insights? Can you give me an outside perspective? That's what it looks like to recognize that you have blind spots. Hey, I'm not the best at this. Can I get another set of eyes on this? This is kind of how I'm going to approach this problem. Do you think that this is the best way to approach that problem? What would you do in this situation? Can I bounce this idea off of you? I just need another set of eyes or another set of ears or another brain working on this problem. The best leaders recognize they have blind spots and figure out a plan to address that. The fourth myth is that leaders don't need a team. This goes back to the very first problem here of believing that you're the hero of the organization. You're not. I just want to reiterate that. You're not the hero. Heroes don't need teams. Heroes are usually these independent, some cases stubborn, or maybe just really resolved people. I'm going to do this one thing and I'm so focused on it. Good leaders recognize that they need teams. In fact, the best leaders recognize that that's how they work, is through teams. Leadership is so much more about being a conductor than it is about being the best oboe player in the orchestra. Your focus completely changes. Now you're queuing people up. You're putting the right people in the right positions. You're handing the right sheet music to the right people. And then you're saying, let's do all of this together. Let's be in harmony with one another. Oh, I hear a stray note over there. Let's have a conversation to make sure that we get alignment. Oh, somebody's on the wrong page of the music. Let's go have a conversation. Hey, we're on this page, not that page. That's what leaders do. Leaders are empowering other people to be able to be more effective. When you have a good leader in your life, I'm very thankful that I've had a couple good leaders in my life. When you have a good leader in your life, your skills are maximized. In fact, in some cases, they're stretched beyond even what you believed you could do. When you don't have a good leader in your life, their limitations are evident in your workload. So as a leader, you want to be very focused on the value of your team because your team is the capacity of your leadership. The best leaders are able to get more out of a team than anyone could imagine. And the worst leaders are able to get less out of a good team than anybody could imagine. If your team isn't putting out a lot of good work, or if your team isn't excelling in the areas that are important or meaningful, there's a good chance you can actually trace it back to the manager or to the leader as opposed to the individual contributors. Now, of course, there's a time where you have people on your team that are not doing a good job and they're not skilled and all of those things. But most of the time, leaders assume it's an other person problem when it's actually the leader's problem. So focus on not just having a team, not just caring for a team, but actually leveraging and developing a team intentionally. And then the fifth myth here that I want to bust is this idea that leaders need to be capable in executing the trade that they're managing. This one has caused a lot of rifts that I have seen across the church. Somebody gets put in a position where they're overseeing a department, a creative industry. It could be comm, it could be productions. Doesn't matter what it is. Anything in this creative realm of serving in the church, the person who comes on the team who's now leading, they don't have a background in design. Oh, they don't know how to do motion graphics. They're not a video editor. They don't know how to use any of the tools. It doesn't matter. They can still be a really, really good leader. And for you, you can be a really good leader over proficiencies that you don't have expertise in. In fact, that's typically the trajectory that leaders go on. They start by leading the proficiency that they're comfortable with and that they're familiar with. But at some point, you're going to be challenged and you're going to grow into an opportunity where you are now leading proficiencies that you don't have any experience in. And this is where the real power of good leaders comes in. Having a conversation with a designer isn't about knowing fonts. It's not about knowing colors, because talking fonts, talking colors, talking composition while valuable at times, it's actually the leader stepping down into an execution conversation. That's a conversation about execution. I would have done a different font. I think that a different color would work better. Those are execution decisions. They're not strategic and they're not leadership. There's nothing wrong with those conversations, but that's not the expression of a leader. Leaders operate at different tiers than executors, and that's okay. They're supposed to. The plane at which they navigate the organization is a different one because we need both. We need executors and we need strategists and we need leaders. We need those people existing in the church. Now, sometimes it takes one person to do many of those different functions, but we need those different roles being executed. And so to hold the belief that you have to be an expert in order to manage a team, or this is probably more true for those of you listening, that the person who is managing you has to be an expert in your trade, it's just not going to happen. That's just an impractical expectation, and it is a non-leadership minded expectation. Now, there are absolutely things that good leaders do to begin breaking down some of those barriers when it comes to common understanding. But for me, when I led productions, the success or failure of my tenure leading that team was not conditional on me learning how to run a light board or run sound for the weekend. That was not the way that effective leadership happened. Effective leadership looked like the relationships amongst our teams were getting better. The ability for the productions team to lean in and speak and offer their expertise in a meaningful way, that was increasing. That's what it looks like for effective leadership to happen. So you can see here that effective leadership doesn't necessarily mean mastery of the trade that you're overseeing. And so if you're sitting on a team right now and you're thinking to yourself, well, this person doesn't understand my job, that may very well be correct, but there's also a good chance that you don't understand theirs. Leadership looks different than execution. Those are things that I have seen in my time. I've walked through each of these. I had a lot of insecurity when I was stepping over the productions team because I don't have a productions background, but I found that there were things that I should be investing in that actually execution would have been a distraction. And so each of these 5 myths are particularly true for me. I had to battle each one of them. And so if you face a leadership opportunity, whether you're new to one or you're aspiring to be in one, these 5 things are things that you're going to have to reconcile internally. You're going to have to get your mindset to shift away from execution and toward leadership. And these are 5 really, really smart areas to start making that mindset shift.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Leading Healthy Creative Teams. This podcast is just one of the ways Lunchtime Heroes helps build healthy creative teams in the church. Stay up to date on the latest by signing up for the Creative Bites email at lunchtimeheroes.co.